Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, boxing fans around the world. I've got some really huge updates, including a breaking news update in the boxing world. But before I get to my breaking update that I'm excited for because it means we're moving forward at least in this division. But I have to hold myself back. I want to make sure that I cover everything that has happened because a couple of things have happened that were not announced. And so I want to talk about those. And if you're able to track down those fights somewhere, look for like clips. Generally, Twitter's pretty good about putting clips up of various fights that have happened with some of the fans. And then even like some of the broadcasters will put like clips of the signature parts. And then after the fact, YouTube sometimes will put things like highlights, clips from the fights. So I want to just go through some of the things that I think are worth your time to watch that have happened recently this weekend to in the boxing world to certain of these fighters because some of these, like I said, I didn't even know some of these guys were fighting, to be honest. And some of these were regional, so I wouldn't have seen them. But let's jump right into this. Um, I don't follow guys like Rene Alvarado, for example. He's there, but he's not like he's one. I can't even call him a journeyman. It's like some guys are just known, but haven't really done much of anything. That's Rene Alvarado. Rene Alvarado was in competition. He fought, I believe it was Lamont Roach. Correct me if I get that wrong, but I believe it was Lamont Roach. Like I said, I didn't follow it. But apparently, this was on the undercard of Zurdo Ramirez versus Yunieski Gonzalez. And so Lamont Roach, he beat Rene Alvarado. I don't know that that means anything because, again, I don't rate Rene Alvarado worth of anything. If you rate Rene Alvarado because you're aware of him, then that would obviously be an L that is for the guy. But I didn't rate the guy hardly at all. I don't know. Ricky Burns, he fought a guy named Dominguez. I had no idea Ricky Burns was fighting. I saw no evidence he was fighting. But I think what they did was they just started stacking these undercards for Jake Paul and Tyron Woodley too, and then Zurdo Ramirez and Yunieski Gonzalez. I think they just stacked the undercards with kind of these last minute, let's just throw some names in there because like Jay Leon, Hug Like I'm in Love, he's been out of the ring for like 3 freaking years and he was on Paul Woodley's undercard. He fought Marcus Oliveira. I don't know. I have not followed Marcus Oliveira, but I do know Jay Leon Hug Like I'm in Love. He's not. I don't rate him as a fighter, and he's like the Chris Algieri of the division. I don't know why he still fights because he's made enough money where he doesn't need to. He was actually doing some like being a sparring partner for some guys. He also did a few announcing things. I don't know why he hasn't retired by now. And I'm not saying that to hate on the dude, but it's like every time, it's not even the A level. Every time he steps to the B level, the dude takes a loss because he's known to just, he fights and then he takes an L every time after he clinches excessively and the whole nine. And I remember he got sparked out some time ago, bad. And the reason I remember that spark out, and I don't even remember the opponent, is because during the weigh-in, you had Duran brokering the face-off. And Jay Leon's dancing in front of the guy like he's a badass, and then Duran starts doing the dance too. That's why I remember that. And then he goes in there and gets absolutely sparked out because he was apparently weight drained. I don't even remember the guy he fought. I'm looking it up right now as I'm talking because now it's getting on my nerves. And then Jay Leon, the part of the reason that he was out, just so that you know, he got arrested. Apparently, he was either beating his girlfriend or wife or something. So he had some legal issues, just like Victor Ortiz has had issues, Broner's had issues. It seems like there's as Tim Bradley says, a pattern of some of the guys where there's just you get to a level of success and then all of a sudden you just start acting out against your girl and then have domestic and then so that's part of the reason he was out. Okay, yeah, David Benavidez, that's the guy he fought, and then that's when he got stopped in 2 rounds. It was David Benavidez. That's where he was dancing. If you can find that weigh-in, I believe it was the weigh-in, and you want to see it was comedy, but find the weigh-in for Jay Leon versus David Benavidez, and you'll see him dancing with Duran, and then Benavidez when it sparked him out, and he lost to Kid Chocolate Peter Quillen. So the moment he lost to Kid Chocolate, I knew the dude was done because it's not that Kid Chocolate is a bum. He's not. It's just that Kid Chocolate has always lost every time he stepped up too. He's the same kind of guy that doesn't seem to want to give it his all to the business. And he hit a level of success. I want to say I don't even remember what Kid Chocolate's peak was, but some of these guys just hit a peak of success and they make a certain amount of money and then they just drop it. And the ironic thing about Quillen specifically, having lost to somebody like Quillen was one of those guys that was heavily hyped by the media, by the networks, as the next big thing because he was able to beat and get the title off of Njikam. This is in New York. And he retained the title a number of times, and it looked like he was on a way up. But the only name that Quillen ever had was Winky Wright, and Winky Wright was already on steep decline by the time he fought him. But he banked on that with a steady pattern of wins until he hit Danny Jacobs, and then Danny Jacobs stopped him in the first round. That was that blitz. And I argue that that was truly just a blitz. It wasn't that Quillen was on the decline. It's that Quillen didn't prepare for a blitz strategy because that's not how Jacobs fights. So that could have happened anywhere. But from the moment that happened, he's been tentative. It's Quillen. So I knew that it's like, you should not be losing to Quillen. You should have been able to get him out of there because he's vulnerable, and that didn't happen. So I don't rate Jalen Love, and that's why I call him Jalen Hug Like I'm in Love, because he goes in there and excessively clinches. So when I saw him get sparked up by David Benavidez, he didn't even get a chance to employ his master strategy of clinching excessively. He just got completely blitzed and taken out of there. And David Benavidez is a decent fighter. So it wasn't that I felt that it was a bad thing. Just I didn't even know the dude was fighting. I didn't know. I thought he retired. He apparently didn't retire, but it is what it is. Now, here's the fun stuff. Let's get to the real fun stuff here. Morel and Atlantis Fox. David Morel versus Atlantis Fox. I said before the fight, if you go back and listen to that episode, I said I don't rate these Fox brothers, but I also don't rate David Morel that much. And I felt like Atlantis Fox, it's like there's a lot of hype around these two guys, like the Charlo brothers, and I didn't see it, and I didn't think there was going to be much to this. Fox got stopped in 4 rounds. Stopped. So his train's already been derailed. His brother Mikhail's already been derailed by Meister. And here's the thing. That whole Meister versus Michael Fox, that fight that happened, and I know NSB believes something different, but here's the truth of the matter. Michael Fox, he's all flash, just like Atlantis. It's like they're all flash. They go in there, they look good, they're flashy with the throws, they're flashy with the jabs, they're dancing to the crowd, they're playing, but they're not landing anything significant. They're not causing significant damage. They're not showing me that you're trying to get the guy out of there. I said that on the previous episode. I want to see you're trying to get the guy out of there. Now, if you're somebody whose style was purposely built to do that, I still want to see that you're landing shots. You're not just, most of the Fox jabs and punches, they're designed just to trick you into thinking that they're landing when they don't land. They clearly don't land. That's what I see from the Fox brothers. The outcome does not surprise me. I'm happy to see both of them get completely beaten, from my eyes, dominant. But McCall was a close decision. But I felt he lost dominant. And then, of course, Atlantis Fox gets stopped. That was a good thing. I loved seeing it. We had a lot of knockouts. Anesia Estrada, who I don't follow, but I'm aware of her as a fighter, gets a knockout there. Of course, Atlantis Fox gets completely stopped. Jose Valenzuela, who I don't know anything about him specifically, but he gets a stoppage. So we had a lot of stoppages and a lot of knockouts, and that seems to be more of a thing now. As people are getting more desperate for title shots, we're seeing more of that. Now, here's the key one. Jake Paul and Tyron Woodley, and then, of course, Zurdo Ramirez and Yunieski Gonzalez. If you go back to the previous episode, I said that I didn't see much of Yunieski Gonzalez. However, it seemed like he had a decent resume, but I didn't think much of him. Didn't know anything about the guy. Gilberto Zurdo Ramirez, I saw as a solid fighter, and I said that Zurdo was going to get him out of there. That's exactly what happened, but it took 10 rounds to get him out of there. But it was a war. I think it was worth, if you can catch that fight, I think it was worth seeing this fight, because Yunieski Gonzalez had a good showing, certainly, against a threat, against a very talented threat in Zurdo Ramirez. So I agree. We should, if you can, watch that fight as an evidence of what boxing could be at the high level, because both guys had a very capable showing, and it was worth seeing that fight. And it's sad that guys like Zurdo Ramirez are stuck in situations where their fights, are happening at like I think that one happened at like 10 or 11 o'clock at night yesterday. We can't do that. And I know it's hard because when you're doing worldwide broadcasts, how can you make everybody happen at the same time? But it feels like there has to be a better way that we can feature these guys at better times so that they're able to be spotlit. So Zurdo Ramirez versus Yunieski Gonzalez, I think that one's worth your time. Jake Paul and Tyron Woodley. Jake Paul gets Tyron Woodley out of there in the sixth round. It took 6 rounds again for Jake Paul, but Jake Paul was able to put a stamp on it and say, look, I'm knocking you out. And he goes in there and knocks him out. That's what you want to see from guys, is that they get him out of there. Because the first fight, remember, Jake Paul gassed. He couldn't get him out of there. We didn't know what was going on. This time, we know what was going on, and we know what Jake Paul was about, and Jake Paul goes and does what he needs to do. Now, remember, this happened after Tommy Fury backed out, and so now it compels, in my mind, Tommy Fury to step up and say, look, I just put a signature stamp on twice now on this guy who said he was going to beat me, and he still didn't beat me. Now, in time for you to step up and prove what you're going to do, that would be the first real boxer that then Jake Paul would get a chance to fight. And I think it's worth seeing that for any boxing fan, because again, as I said, Jake Paul is taking it serious, and I don't know what it takes for people to understand. We're not calling him a upper level, top level, high level, anything. We're saying he's taking it serious. It appears like he's improving in every fight. It appears like he's adapting his game. It appears like he's learning from the veterans that he is sparring with. So it's not like he's sparring bums and then goes in there and plays like Orange Cassidy. He's taking it serious. So the fact that he hasn't fought a pro boxer is really an indictment on the business, because most of these pro boxers, the ones that want to get in with him, are the ones at the top level because they want the cash out. But he needs kind of the intro level now. He needs to step into it. Tommy Fury is the first step in type fight. I think Tommy Fury only has like 7 wins out of 7 fights. So I would love to see that fight happen, if only just to test him against an actual boxer that has some boxing skill, so that we can really assess his level of improvement as a boxer. But I think we need to give the guy a chance. He's trying, he's taking it serious, he's respecting the business, most importantly, and he doesn't deserve to get bashed like NSB and other places are doing. So that one was a knockout in the 6th. It was a knockout. I don't believe it was a stoppage. I think it was a true knockout. I didn't watch it because it was pay-per-view, and I'm like, I'm not doing that. But it was a knockout in the 6th. I think that one's he is worth watching. I think the one thing that would help Jake Paul, honestly, and I know it sounds weird, but I know that, for the salary that he commands, it's kind of hard to feature him elsewise, but he's the kind of fighter that really needs to be on something like DAZN, something where it's a subscription-based service, because most of his followers are on YouTube, so they're already used to subscribing to things, and it's a lower price point for that crowd, because most of his audience is going to be somewhere in the the 12 to 25 range, vast majority. As he gets more into boxing, that demographic will shift a little bit, but his predominant audience is still on the younger part of the scale. And so the people who would want to watch him, I think that it would be easier for them to get into something like DAZN to do it, or ESPN Plus to do it, and keep the guy off pay-per-view, because it's hard to justify, $50 to $80 just to watch a one fight, because the undercard might be sketchy. That's my opinion. Other than that, I wouldn't change a thing about him, except, there's certain fundamentals he lacks because he's new. And I think he just needs to have the right matching. And I know that sounds controversial, but he's new. You need to match him correctly so that he can develop as a fighter. He's still young. He clearly has fundamental, desire to respect the business and go in and do what he needs to do. And he recognizes his role, which is to bring eyes to the sport. We need to celebrate that, and we need to cheer the guy on instead of hate on him because of his YouTube presence. His YouTube presence, his persona on the YouTube side, is not his boxing presence. They are two different things, and we need to separate the two for that reason, because they are not the same thing. And I think he's going to get to the point of Wilder level hate, and that's unfair because he's taking it serious and he's respecting the business, and we need to respect him as a result. So that's Jake Paul and Tyron Woodley 2 is wrapped up. 2 wins for Jake Paul, and 2 more wins on his record as he rises. Now, here's some of the new announcements that's happening here. It was just announced that Stanionis has agreed to step aside to fight Yordenis Ugas, and instead Stanionis will fight Buteyev. Now, the reason I'm excited on this one is that it means that Errol Spence and Yordenis Ugas is now open door to happen ideally next. That excites me because, one, Yordenis Ugas is a solid fighter. However, he's a little bit older, but as we saw against Manny Pacquiao, he's still game, he still comes to win, and he's still fundamentally sound. However, it's not like he's undefeated. He's had some losses. They were all close losses. He's kind of like the more technical version of Sean Porter in a sense that he's always going to give you problems. Everybody he fights, he's going to give you some difficulty in his style and the way that he comes forward. But when he hits the top level, it's harder for him to get you out of there unless there was something that the guy made a mistake on. So the fact that Ugas was able to deal with Manny Pacquiao the way he did, and that was a brilliant performance. People dismissed it like NSB because Manny was old. Here's the fact. That very same old Manny Pacquiao took 7 rounds off Keith one-time Thurman. And Keith one-time Thurman was at one time perceived to be the number 1 guy in the division and was heavily, I think he was a huge favorite going into this one. So I want to see now how Errol Spence is able to deal with the stylistic challenges that Ugas presents, because Spence is a precision fighter. He comes in there and he'll walk you down. Even though you don't think he should be able to do it, he'll walk you down. He will come in there and he will walk you back and he will beat your body. He is not a runner, and he works to try to get you out of there when it makes sense. I don't think he's going to work to try to knock Ugas out. If that fight happens next, I will be dialed in. I don't care if it is pay-per-view, because stylistically it is so mentally compatible in my mind of a test for Errol Spence, because he's not faced anybody that has been as technical as a Yordenis Ugas. The closest I can think of was Algieri, and Spence knocked Algieri out first. So I'm excited on that one. It's a unification. If that happens, of course, that would unify the WBC, the IBF, and the WBA. And I believe if they agree, the Ring magazine might even agree to bring the Ring title into play, because Ugas is considered number 3 in the division, and by their rules, the number 3 is generally good enough to go for the Ring. If it's gone for the Ring, then the general consensus, I'm not talking NSB's opinion, I'm talking the general consensus, is that guy is basically lineal champion at that point. That's if the Ring decides to do that. The Ring might withhold it. The Ring might say, well, no, we put Crawford up at number 2, and even though you're not fighting Crawford next, we're only going to give Ring because of that, but then they would be violating their own rules. It's in black letter. If you go down to the rules for the lineal title and the Ring champion, if you go down to that page, there's a paragraph, and it says in black letters, if the number 1 and the number 3 fight, whoever wins that one will be regarded as the Ring and lineal champion. It specifically says that. So if they do that, that means they would be going back on their word, because it means this should be for lineal and Ring, as far as the Ring is considered, and for consensus. And then we now have a more compelling argument for Spence and Crawford, with Spence getting 60% of the split, and Crawford has to back off his 50-50. As certain people call him, Terrence No Pay Cut Crawford cannot play, because you've got a guy then, if Spence beats Ugas, which isn't guaranteed, I want to stress this. I'm not saying Spence guarantees beats, I'm saying that winner will have 3 belts, and the Ring, and the lineal. There's no way you can command 50-50 split going up against that kind of guy. The flip of that, though, is that if Ugas pulls it out, Ugas isn't a draw. He does not draw on his own. The fight with Manny Pacquiao was one of the lowest drawing fights of Manny's career. That tells me that Ugas just isn't, he's not a well-known name, and of course he doesn't speak English, and that hurts him in interviews, I think. So he does a good showing. He's a very community kind of guy. He talks to fans as much as he can. He's on social media. So he's one of those nice guys, but he's not too nice. When the time comes and the bell rings, he goes in there and he works hard to try to earn your money, make it feel like it was worth it. So I think he's worth that. He just doesn't draw. So the drawing is going to be Spence, and I'm curious to see what the numbers are going to look like. If Spence can pull at least 300,000 buys against Ugas, he will have surpassed Manny's draw against that same guy for a unification fight. It's going to really go down to promotion, I think. But even Pacquiao and Ugas was promoted to a pretty good degree. But remember, that was supposed to be Pacquiao and Spence, and that one would have drawn huge numbers. But when Spence backed out, it tanked the whole fight. So I'm really curious to see the numbers. I'm really excited to see that fight happen. It has not been signed. There's just a belief that it's going to happen because Stanionis is not in the way, and he will face Bataev in the tournament that they're trying to do for WBA to get rid of excess belts. And if you weren't aware about that whole fiasco, the WBA is not just these guys. Across the board, they're trying to get rid of interim and gold and silver and all these different tertiary titles that are not in contention and get down to one champion of the division. At minimum, they want to get to two, where you might have a regular and a super, but they really are trying to get down to one because they see there's too much sprawl in the division. Everybody's got a belt. So they've been trying to fix that. And it just so happened that Ugas is the super champion. Stanionis then became mandatory by way of this tournament, and it threw a wrench in Spence Ugas to unify. Well, if they unify, now the title gets vacated anyway at WBA, and now these guys can all fight each other to earn a shot to get the belt and then go from there. I think it's a brilliant way to go because now you're necessarily getting rid of excess titles just because you are forcing these guys to fight each other. Like, that's what we should want. That's the other reason I'm excited about it. So that's happening there. Now, I want to talk about what's coming next. This fight that's happening, that's been announced, recently announced, apparently it's a signed, sealed, and delivered deal. And I want to talk about what it means. But before I get too deep into this, one, I want to stress what I said before about the welterweight division. And what I felt was a welterweight division that was on the decline. That there were challenges trying to get the welterweights back into the mix and back into contention and a stronger deal. And there's just been, we've seen a lot of the older guys, they're starting to go out of the division. We're getting new blood in there, and we don't know what's going to happen with the new class, if they're going to be able to be just as exciting. We see guys that are certainly exciting, but are they going to be able to sustain it the way that they did? Remember, we had a golden period just recently in welterweight. Crawford aside, we had a golden division. We had Errol Spence, who fought Danny Garcia and Sean Porter. We had Sean Porter, who fought Errol Spence, Danny Garcia, and Keith Thurman. We had Keith Thurman, who fought Danny Garcia and Sean Porter. And then we had, Sean Porter fights everybody, Keith fights. We had this, everybody's fighting everybody else to where we can understand it. The only one who was an outlier later was Keith One-Time Thurman. Keith One-Time Thurman, injuries were part of it. His body is breaking down. It's obvious. He's admitted. His body's breaking down. It's harder for him to perform the same way he could without his body giving him issues. And so he's been in and out at times. I believe he fought Danny Garcia injured, and then I believe he fought Sean immediately after an injury, and then he gets injured again. Remember, Keith Thurman fought Josecito Lopez and almost lost that fight. People could say whatever. He almost lost that fight. I'd say the ref should have stopped it, and if it was anybody else getting beat down like that in that round, I think it was round 4, that fight would have been stopped. So we saw there was something not right with Keith. He was fresh off a delay there, and we saw that performance, and then he was able to pull it out pretty good, decently good against Danny Swift, but Sean Porter could have gone another way, in my opinion. So he's been in wars, and his body is just breaking down. It happens to every fighter at some point. He got married at some point, and I think he lost the killer instinct too. I think he lost the fighter instinct, the desire, the hunger. Remember, this is the guy that was calling out Paulie Malignaggi at the preference. You better not duck me, son. And we don't see that anymore. I don't know what happened that caused him to lose it, because it seemed like the moment he got a title, he got domesticated. It's like Paulie in the movie. You got civilized, kid, and it just something went wrong. So he's been trying to do a get back, as he calls it, repeatedly, and it's just not gone well. Recently announced, it's going to be on Fox pay-per-view. Keith One-Time Thurman versus Mario Barrios. This is going to happen in February, first week of February. Again, it's Fox Sports pay-per-view. So if you are a Keith Thurman fan or you're a welterweight division fan, That's one you're going to want to dial into, regardless of why. If you're Keith or you're just welterweight, you're going to want to watch that one because it will tell us a lot about the future of the division. Here's what I'm saying and why I make such a statement. First, we need to understand where Keith Thurman is coming from. What's really happening here with him and his mind? Is his mind right? Is his mind wrong? What the heck's going on with Keith one-time Thurman? We need to see a performance. Now, I want to talk about Mario Barrios, though. It says Mario Barrios. If this is the same Mario Barrios whose most recent outing would have been in June of this year, where he got stopped in 11 by Tank Davis, that's lightweight for those not paying attention, I'm concerned about what it means for Keith because it's like a make or break for Keith. It's a decent get back in the sense that it's not a completely dominant performance. But let's be honest here. Mario Barrios, as a fighter, he's a solid fighter. He comes to win. All that. He's a solid fighter. But let's be honest. He fought Bader Akhmedov. This is in 2019, late. I remember watching this fight. Akhmedov got robbed, period, point blank. It was a robbery, and that gave Barrios the WBA title at super lightweight, right? So now he seems to be going up and down, Barrios. He won a title at welterweight in 2018, and he largely, I believe, campaigned at welterweight and then went down to basically light welterweight, which would be 140. So then he goes and wins a title at super lightweight against Akhmedov, which is basically a robbery. I felt it was a robbery because he was getting beat down the entire time through. In my mind, that was on the Errol Spence and Sean Porter fight. If you don't know what I'm talking about, but I felt it was a robbery. I felt Akhmedov won that fight clearly. So then Barrios defends the title the one time, and then he gets stopped at 11 by Tank. Now, the fact that it went 11 is telling, but he was getting, I felt, dominated. That entire fight was Barrios against Tank. And it was Barrios' first loss. And he now, if it's true that his recovery is against Keith one-time Thurman, it means three things. One, Keith will be fighting a guy fresh off a loss. Two, he'll be fighting a guy that'll be off not a significant layoff, but he'll be off a significant layoff. So he'll be at a distinct disadvantage where it looks like they were trying to balance the disadvantage by giving him a guy that was fresh off a loss. But also Barrios is jumping up, what is that, 2 or 3 weight classes to fight Keith Thurman. So what it looks like, if it's the same Mario Barrios, and I'm pretty sure it is that we are forcing somebody to jump up classes. Now, it might be a catch weight, because Keith Thurman he could theoretically fight at 147 or 140, but he's talked about even 154. So he's able to manipulate his weight, and Barrios clearly can manipulate his weight, and Barrios has fought at welterweight before. So it might be that the thought process was, well, you fought at welterweight before, so just go back up to welterweight and see how you do. But normally what happens is when you go down, you have more power because your power generally doesn't carry significantly up with you. We saw that with Terrence Crawford. He can't one-punch spark people out. He can stop you by swarming, right? And he just outclasses you, but he can't one-punch knock you out. Same with Amir Khan. Amir Khan was chinning dudes like Dimitri Salita and so on. But when he goes up to 147, he's nowhere near as effective, and Chris Algieri almost beats the dude. Same with Chris Algieri. Chris Algieri was not a knockout artist, but he had a lot more power when he's at the lower weight classes than when he was at the greater ones. So when Barrios went down to fight Tank, or to get the title and then eventually fight Tank, it wasn't that Barrios wasn't game. He was game, but you're going against Tank Davis at one of his comfortable weight classes, not his most comfortable. But Tank is still in that range where he had his power. Barrios goes down and he's not able to really do much to Tank Davis. Tells me that the power wasn't really there either. But at the same time, I go back, prior to Barrios going down, he was getting a lot more knockouts. So Barrios is a unique case because it seems like it's a good move for him to have been at welterweight, which causes me to question why he went down in the first place. Because if he hadn't gone down, he might not have had a loss by now, and then we would have had undefeated Barrios fighting Keith one-time Thurman. Instead, we have one loss on both sides. with a guy that hasn't been at welterweight for 3 years and another guy that hasn't even been fighting for roughly about the same time. Like it's this weird dynamic with that one. That's why I say it's worth worth watching, because it'll be telling about the welterweight division and what it's going to look like going forward. I'm gonna have Mario Barrios having the advantage, and I know that's controversial because it's Keith Thurman, but the truth is Barrios is young. He's only 26 years old. He seemed to have been significantly more dominant and successful at welterweight when he was at welterweight before, although he didn't fight anybody worth anything. The point is that it was clear that welterweight was comfortable for him. The only times he ever went 12 rounds, though, were lightweight. But within the rounds he got when he was at welterweight, he was dominant. He did go one time 12 rounds as a welterweight, but that's what I mean. He doesn't have a lot of 12-round experience at welterweight, whereas Keith Thurman predominantly was welterweight for the vast majority and predominantly 12 rounds for the vast majority. But Keith Thurman, if I look at his recent pattern, a loss to Manny Pacquiao that could have gone either way, to be honest. If he hadn't gotten dropped, I had Keith winning that fight. Then you had Josecito Lopez, who was bombing on him, I believe it was round 4. Other than that, it was a clear decision for Keith, but it seemed like Keith fell off. So a Keith on decline against the Barrios, who was on the rise but took a loss against Tank Davis. I'm looking at it like, okay, young guy, he's likely hungry. He gets a chance to make a name against Keith one-time Thurman. And it's a chance for an upset, and then Barrios to make a name for himself again at welterweight, even though he only has one loss. I'm leaning Barrios for the advantage in this one, even though it's Thurman. Thurman has to show me something. Thurman has to show me he's hungry again. Thurman has to show me he's truly back. That means he has to get a knockout, and I'm not sure he can knock this guy out. That's what I'm saying. And I don't know if it would go safely to the judges with Barrios' style versus Keith's style, because remember, Keith is a boxer at the heart. He's not an aggressive fighter like that. Tank is a boxer as well, but Tank boxes with intentions to get you out of there. Keith doesn't do that anymore. Keith boxes in order to get you off of him, and that's fine. But as we saw with Josecito, if somebody gets inside on him, he's gonna be in trouble. As we saw with Manny Pacquiao, Keith tends to back up a lot, and if you back up against guys that are aggressive, he tends to get clipped a lot. So I'm leaning Barrios. I hope I'm wrong, because I do think Keith Thurman deserves the chance to prove he's still there and that he still has a chance to pull this out. But I'm leaning towards Barrios. If it's truly the same Mario Barrios, and I can't think of a reason that it's not, I'm leaning Barrios as a young, hungry lion up and coming in the division to try to shake things up, take out Keith Thurman, and then immediately, I guarantee you, he'd be in the mix for either Crawford's title or for WBA. And then on the undercard of that pay-per-view, just to talk about some other guys that are going to be featured, Leo Santa Cruz is making a comeback. Remember, he's coming off a loss, brutal knockout loss to Tank Davis, so Leo Santa Cruz is going to be there. Abel Ramos is going to be there. He's also in the welterweight division. He's fighting Josecito Lopez. Lopez is one of those rugged warriors, veteran warriors right now. I think he gets understated at times, Liz Lopez, but he's still here. He's still game for however long. And then Carlos Castro. I've never heard of Carlos Castro myself, but he's fighting Luis Neri, and I do know Luis Neri. He's coming off a loss. Luis Neri, this is at bantamweight and super bantamweight. I believe this one's taking place at super bantamweight, I believe. But Luis Neri is coming back. If you're a fan of the bantamweight division, Luis Neri is one to watch. Now, I do think that Luis Neri has been overrated by many of the orgs. That doesn't mean he's not a good fighter. I just think the orgs tend to highly overrate certain guys just because they look dominant rather than the accomplishments they truly had. So Luis Neri did fight some solid fighters, but let's be honest, it was nowhere close between Neri and Spence when I look at where those fighters were that they beat at the time they beat them. Luis Neri's not even close. Like Inoue, who gets a lot of flack, and rightfully so, he's beaten top-tier fighters. Now he's taken a soft touch, and I think he almost got taken the distance very recently by a soft touch. Does that mean he's on decline? No, it means he's fighting to a level of opposition. That's what got Luis Neri a loss, is he was fighting at a certain level so long, then eventually goes in there, and he fights a guy, and he's fighting at a level because he gets comfortable, and then he takes a loss, and then all of a sudden they're taking him off the top ranks, the top level rankings. I don't think it's an end of his career because the guy that he lost to is a rock solid, durable fighter in Brandon Figueroa. So I'm not going to say that, okay, he's done and da da da. And he's worth watching is Luis Neri. So that whole pay per view has some really good fights on there that I think are going to be worth your time to see. And it's a great return, I think, for Keith Thurman to show us that he's still here, or this might be the twilight. Because remember, of the ones I mentioned that were fighting everybody else, Keith, Sean, Danny Swift's gone. He went to 154. Porter retired. So now you only have Keith Thurman left. He's the last of that guard. And Manny Pacquiao retired. So Keith's the only one left standing. I don't count Errol Spence because he came later. So now it's a whole different ball game. It's a whole different field, and that should excite you if you're a welterweight fan. Is what is this going to look like? Is Keith going to get taken out by a young up-and-coming lion and taken out of the business? Then you're left now with effectively a new class that's already on its way out in Errol Spence and Terrence Crawford and Yordenis Ugas. And what is that going to look like? Then we come up to guys like Stanionis, Buteyev, Virgil Ortiz, Boots Ennis, Blair the Flair Cobbs, and so many other young fighters. And I'm saying, will Mario Barrios add his name to that next class for the welterweight division, and what does that mean? And the fact that we're seeing so many knockouts and stoppages recently means there's a hunger out there. It means that there's a desire to now step up and do more. And there's significantly less, I think, of the excuses happening. Now, COVID is going to play a factor in all of this. Fights can get canceled, fights can get rescheduled, all sorts of things can go south, and COVID can get in our way. But folks, if we see Keith Thurman come back and then get taken out by Mario Barrios, a former super lightweight, it's the end of an era is what that means, and we'll need to start focusing on the future and these new guys. So my vision would then shift. It would mean that I would sign completely off of Keith if he doesn't want to retire, but it would tell me that we truly are in a new version of the division, and we now need to start praising these new fighters. Places like NSB and even Reddit Boxing will trash these guys, but I'm going to keep following anybody who shows up and gives me my time and money's worth. That's the excitement happening. That's what happened this weekend. A lot has changed. The whole landscape has shifted around, and we've got a very exciting Q1 of 2022 ahead of us, folks. Strap in, and if you are a boxing fan, again, feel free to like and subscribe. You know where the buttons are. I'm not going to do the stupid pop-ups going on. I would appreciate it. I will tell you this is not my primary conduit for podcasting. However, I recognize that it is one of the outlets, so this is where the boxing side podcasts will be simulcast. It's onto YouTube so that you get it there. Also on my regular podcast, which I'm in the current phases of building it out the way I want it to do, will be there in case you want to add it to your podcast app to do the same kind of coverage. But for now, this will do, and I appreciate you if you do subscribe, and hopefully this has been refreshing of coverage of the boxing landscape instead of kind of this siloed tribal type rants that seem to happen on other channels. Take it easy.